Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you taking the time out of your week to have a listen to the podcast as always. Before I get into it, just those favors that I love to ask at the start of each podcast. Make sure you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. Follow us on the socials, so at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. You'll also be able to find video versions of the podcast on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. But in saying that, they are delayed by the time I put the video version up. So if you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes and be notified when I dropped the new audio version of the episode every Saturday morning, you need to make sure that you are subscribed on the podcast platform. So Spotify, Apple, Google, all the other podcast platforms, because that also helps us climb the rankings and get out to more people. So this week, I want to have a talk about alcohol. And the reason I want to have a talk about alcohol is because it is probably the most common question I get from people when I start working with them. One of the most common things I get asked is, can I still have insert drink of choice here when I get home from work? And we're going through a phase, like it's the start of the year. This is the first podcast I am publishing of 2023. It is a time where people are going through, they want to make some change. Hopefully they want to make some change and a positive impact in their life moving forward for the year. And alcohol may be one of those things that you are looking at and you potentially want to curb, or maybe you want to get rid of it out of your life completely. Now, I've gone through my own journey with alcohol to the point where I will drink very, very rarely now. And when I say very, very rarely, the extent of my drinking at the moment in my life is 1 or 2 beers on extremely special occasions, which equates to maybe once every 6 months, right? And there'll even be some special occasions where I won't touch it at all. And I've come to that point from a point earlier in my life where I would drink to excess. I would drink, if I had a beer, I would then go on to have 15 other different drinks and put myself into a state of complete stupidity. And in hindsight, looking at it and looking at that journey and the journey that I've had with alcohol, like I was a complete wanker on the piss. I was somebody who would write themselves off when I drank. When looking back on it, I wasn't the type of person that needed to drink every night. There would be for most of the points, I would drink maybe once or twice a week. But when I would do that, I would just completely write myself off. Like I couldn't sit there and have 1 or 2 beers and then go home and be okay. And there are a whole bunch of things to unpack with that. Like I appreciate now the fact that there was a lot of things that I was unhappy with about myself, and that was my way of masking it. I wasn't confident. I felt that I needed to do that to actually fit in with social groups. There was that social pressure. But all in all, in my younger years, like I had a big problem with alcohol. And as I said, it was one of those things where I think I would justify it because I wouldn't do it every night. Like I wouldn't drink every single night. Therefore, I don't have a problem with this. Looking back on it now, through the eyes of an almost 40-year-old man with a little bit more maturity, like I can say pretty confidently that looking back over that period, I definitely had a problem in the way I would use it and the way I would act when I was on it. And anyway, that was through, I didn't drink a lot before I turned 18. There was a couple of times, but there wasn't a lot. And like, so when I turned 18, there was almost like a 10-year period where I would, at least once on the weekend, if not twice, I would drink to excess. And there would be things that would be more important for it. If I was playing football on Saturday, I wouldn't drink on Friday. There was some times where I did, but I kind of learnt my lesson the hard way, where if you drank before a football game, that football game was not very enjoyable at all. Those of you that have probably done that in your younger years that are listening to this podcast know full well what I'm talking about. there was times where I did it, but it wasn't that often. So there was things where that would stop me from doing it and stop me from drinking at all. But I also knew that I was a person who lived in extremes. So I wouldn't start, like I couldn't just go out to dinner and have one beer, because I knew once I started, I would go down that path and it would be a slippery slope to extreme. And that was like a 10-year period. And then eventually, when we started to open the business and I met my wife, and there started to be other things in my life that were more important to me than alcohol, and I started to become a little bit more confident and a little bit happier with my lot in life, my self-confidence improved. Like, I started to not do it as much, but there was still that underlying tone of when I would do it, rather than doing it like every week. Maybe it was every second week or every third week, but there was still that underlying tone of when I would start, like I would go to the extreme. And when I would go to the extreme, then obviously the next day was a write-off. And not only was the next day a write-off, but I would be super unproductive all the way up some weeks until almost Thursday or Friday. And then the weekend would roll around again, and sometimes there would be another excuse for me to go and drink, and then that whole cycle would repeat. And when you're running your own business, I realized really quickly, coming from somebody who had worked like a payroll job for a while, like, you just can't coast for 3 days a week. If you coast for 3 days a week, you don't get paid. You don't make money. You'll have to close things down pretty quickly. Like, I realized that was not only did I need the money if I wanted to go and drink, but I needed the money to live. And if I didn't work and I was super unproductive for 3 days, like, I wasn't going to get paid. And that was something that I realized really quickly. So that helped me obviously curb that behaviors. On top of that, I'd met my now wife at that point, and that was something that I wanted to enjoy the time with her more and not be drowning in alcohol when we were spending time together. And that was something that there was other things in life that became more important, but there was still that underlying tone every time I drank that when I did, I would take it to the extreme. And it wasn't until I was away coaching a rep football side, and myself and some of the other coaches, we went out for dinner and we actually did have a couple of beers this time. There was times where I could actually have a couple of beers, depending on what the circumstances were. Had maybe 2 or 3 beers with dinner. We had dinner, and then we went back to camp. And that evening, I ended up feeling like there was somebody trying to pull my eye out from the inside of my head with an ice pick. I had probably the most excruciating pain I had ever felt. It was something that I'd never experienced before, and quite frankly, it scared the shit out of me. It lasted for about an hour, and then it subsided. And I kind of thought, wow, that was scary. I left it, and then it happened again the next day. So I went and seen a doctor while we were away on camp. The doctor didn't really give me much, didn't really know, but it kept happening. And it happened all in all for about a week. And about day 4 of it happening, I ended up coming back home. So leaving camp and coming back home, going and seeing my doctor, got some scans done. There was nothing really sinister there, thankfully. But this feeling of literally having your eye ripped out from the inside of your head with an eye, it felt like somebody was digging behind my eye with an ice pick, happened twice a night at 6 p.m. and at about 1 a.m. every night for about a week. And after the scans, I went back to the doctor, and the doctor diagnosed me with cluster headaches. And he ended up giving me medication. The thing to break cluster headaches apparently is to actually break the cycle, because it's all based off your circadian rhythm. It's called a headache because it's in your head, it's in your head. It's not actually a headache like a migraine. It's actually a nerve that is acting up in your head, but because it's all based around circadian rhythms, that's why it happens the same time every single day. Now, there are people that go through cycles of these, and it plagues their life. I've been lucky enough, touch wood, that it hasn't happened to me again since this instance. But anyway, that happened, and it absolutely scared the shit out of me. So doing what I do, like I went in a complete deep dive into cluster headaches, causes, how can you stop it from happening, all of this. And one of the biggest triggers for it was alcohol. And ironically, and it's not proven that that's 100% one of the causes of it, but that's the day that it started, I'd obviously had a few beers. So I decided at that point, like I wasn't drinking anymore at all. Like I just stopped, cut it out, cold turkey, and didn't drink for like 2 years. Luckily enough, I've never had like cluster headaches again, because it was the worst pain that I have felt in my life. Like it was excruciating, and there's really nothing you can do about it once it starts. The idea is you need to try and break the cycle to try and stop it from reoccurring. But that was the catalyst that stopped me to drink completely. And it wasn't until 2 years after that point, we were at a Christmas party for the gym, and I decided that I was going to have a few beers. And I did only have a few beers. I only had 2. Didn't cause cluster headaches. I was okay with it. But after that point, like I had gotten to the point in my life where if I was going to go have a beer, I only did it on special occasions, and I was only going to have a few. And I'm still at that point now. I haven't really swung back the other way where, like, you know, I've had really big nights, right? Like I've had nights where I've had like 3 or 4 beers, and to be honest, like I feel shit the next day after I do it. I feel like absolutely horrible, and I don't like losing days. Like I'm at the point in my life, especially with kids. Those of you that have got kids know that when you're hungover with kids, like it's an absolute nightmare, right? Like it is horrible. It's not something that anyone wants to experience. So if you're doing that regularly, like your kids are going to notice it. Like for my kids, it's really unusual. Like they see me with a beer in my hand and they're like, what's that? Like, because it's that unusual for them to see it. My wife doesn't drink due to some health stuff that she has going on. Or if she does, it's the same thing. It's only one with friends, like, or on a special occasion. But it took me to go through the extreme to actually get rid of it completely. Now, this podcast isn't meant to be about you need to get rid of alcohol. It's just to highlight like what my journey has been to actually get through it. And also when it comes to changing some things, some actions and some habits are so deeply embedded in us that we need to swing to the extreme to actually get rid of it. And that was one thing for me for alcohol. And the thing is, it also took for me to have a massive, massive health scare, something that caused me an immense amount of pain, to make that overall change to get alcohol out of my life to a point where I actually had a better relationship with it and not the negative relationship I had. And there are a whole bunch of other reasons layered into why I don't drink a lot. Some of them are from a health point of view. Number one is my recovery. Like I love training, right? Alcohol affects anybody's ability to train and recover. So from a recovery standpoint, everyone knows like the next workout you do after you've had a big night anyone who drinks knows it's going to suck, right? Like it's like your body's way of, rightly or wrongly, I don't like to use the word punish, but it kind of feels like it, like punishing you for ingesting poison, because that, at the end of the day, that's what alcohol is. Like it's poison, right? But your recovery for the next week will be inhibited. Those of you that have had big nights and do train regularly will know like the level of soreness that you experience for like a week or sometimes even 2 post drinking is going to be a lot higher. And then on top of that, like if you have nagging injuries, if you have things that are limiting you, like pain that is limiting you in joints, so on and so forth, like it is going to exacerbate inflammation. It just is, because your body is ingesting a poison. And that is just, unfortunately, I'm not saying that to make you feel bad about drinking. That is just the way of it. And that is something that when I talk to people about alcohol and drinking and like, you know, the habits surrounding that, it's like it's okay for you to do, but you do need to be aware of the adverse effect that it has on you. And tied into that, your quality of sleep, the night you drink and the night after is affected. It's not actually sleep. there was a podcast that I've been listening to, the Huberman Lad podcast, which is it's a science-based podcast where the science around drinking is actually anything over 2 drinks a week has a physiological adverse effect. And that's 2 drinks a week. That's not 2 drinks a day. When I heard that actually blew me away a little bit because I actually thought it would have been more. But 2 drinks a week is kind of that tipping point where you still don't, and there's no benefit from drinking. Despite what some people will tell you, like 1 glass a week of this will give you this effect. The evidence that has come out over the last decade, there has not been anything to show that drinking any form of alcohol actually has a positive effect. But anything over 2 drinks a week tends to have a negative effect on your overall health and longevity. So that's just something to bear in mind. It doesn't mean that you have to give up completely. Right now, I'm at a point in my life where I have a better relationship with alcohol from a time in my life where I had a horrible relationship with it. I would use it as a crutch to hide inadequacies, hide the way I was feeling about myself, hide how awkward I would feel in social situations, and just the fact that I wasn't happy with my life at that point. And now, if I do, I will only have 1 or 2. And if you do decide to go completely off alcohol, I can tell you a few things. You will get questions. People will rag on you, because especially in Australia, if you're listening to this from somewhere else in the world, it may not be like a societal norm in your country, but in Australia, it definitely is. Like, drinking is almost expected, right? If you go out in a social situation, it is expected that you are going to have a drink with the people that you're out with. And if you don't, it's almost, by some people, it's frowned upon. What I've found is a lot of people that I work with and that I interact with, a lot of them actually want to quit drinking, or they want to curb the amount that they drink, but they're just not sure how to, because they're feeling that external pressure from other people to do that. And I don't know what the answer is for you. And this is a topic. Getting rid of certain things out of your life is not my area of expertise. The whole point of this podcast was kind of just to highlight my journey. And if anything, just say that sometimes you do need to go to the extreme to get rid of some things, right? Or you need to change things. I'm all about changing things in moderation and implementing sustainable habits. I'm all for that. And for some things that will work for me, and the extreme I would take this particular habit to, I needed to swing to the other extreme to completely change the relationship I had with it and change my mindset around it. But you don't have to get rid of alcohol completely. You do need to be aware of the adverse effects it can have to your body, to your training, to your mindset. For somebody who earlier on was diagnosed with mild depression, drinking was not a smart idea for me because that just exacerbated the situation. So I think that awareness around the habits that we have in our life and the things that we are doing is the biggest step that it can take to educating yourself and helping you move forward. And if you do want to change something, changing it. And when it comes to alcohol, you can do it if you do it in moderation. Being aware of how it can adversely affect you is important, and it is not something you need to cut out completely. But for me, it was something that I needed to get rid of completely, because without going to that extreme, I could potentially still be at the point now where when I did have a drink, I would go to the extreme and then I would lose a day, lose a week. And I just I hated that feeling. I hated that feeling that I would feel the next day, that hungover feeling. And then I would almost hate myself for the preceding days afterwards, because I wasn't on, I wasn't sharp, I wasn't able to get stuff done. And when you're running your own business, that's a big, big problem. So alcohol, it's something that people will look at in their life and they'll either see it as a positive or they'll see it as a negative. When people look to make a lifestyle change, I will get asked about it a lot by at least, and I don't even think this is an over exaggeration, 2 in every 3 people will ask me about that at some point. It is up to you whether you get rid of it or not. Being aware of the adverse effects it has on you is one thing, but also knowing what your relationship is like with it, I think, is really important, because that was the thing for me. Like, I had such a negative relationship with alcohol that I needed to get rid of it completely to actually change my relationship with it, so that when I come back to it, I was able to enjoy it rather than not. And that's the thing. Like, when I would drink previously, I would drink whatever just to get me drunk. Whereas now, if I'm having a drink, like, I'll drink it to enjoy the taste of it rather than drinking it for the alcohol content. And if that's something let me know if that's something you struggle with. Like, if you're listening on Spotify, you can actually drop comments and stuff like that on there. So drop a comment on the Q&A down there and let me know. If you're on Facebook, Instagram, send us a message. Let me know if it's something that you have struggled with in the past, or maybe you still struggle with it now. And let me know if you've had success in getting rid of it, because there's a lot of people that I've seen of late who have just decided to cut it out completely, and all power to you. Like, I think it's a very powerful thing if you can do that. For me, I'm pretty much at the point in my life where if I don't want to, I don't have to. And I'm very glad that I'm at that point, because of how, looking back on it, how it negatively affected me for such a long time. So you do you at the end of the day. It's entirely up to you whether you do this or not. Being aware of how it can adversely affect you is super important. However, for me, it's actually been something that I'm glad that I've gotten rid of out of my life. My quality of life, my quality of training, my quality of sleep have all improved as a result of it. So let me know. Let me know what your relationship's like with alcohol, whether you enjoy doing it, whether you, or whether it's something that you're actually trying to curb or get rid of out of your life. So thanks for that. Hopefully you got some value or got a bit of insight into my life out of today's podcast. I appreciate you, as always, joining me every week. Take care. I'll see you next week. Bye.